first time the wind screamed over the eastern horizon, Li Wei felt it not merely on his skin but in his bones. A cold insistence that the sea was calling him to secrets no map could hold. The year was 1421, or at least that was what the imperial calendar claimed. The historian in him knew that time was a fragile thing, a convenient veil over the ambitions of men and emperors. Behind the high walls of Nanjing, Zhang He's fleets were said to sail to lands beyond imagination, but whispers in the port spoke of journeys no scholar dared record, of waters beyond the known world where the empire might stretch not just across the oceans, but across centuries. Li Wei's father had been a mapmaker, an obsessive man who drew coastlines that might not exist and annotated them with warnings in a script that only the initiated could decipher. When his father died, Li Wei inherited not only the maps but the obsession. An idea that perhaps the emperor's eyes, so proud and sharp, had glimpsed something the rest of the world would never know. Somewhere past the southern islands, past the edge of the Typhoon Gate, lay a continent forgotten by all but the waves. America, a word unspoken, unknown, waited like a phantom. The first fleet he joined was not one of the grand armadas, not a flotilla of lacquered dragons and golden sails. No, Li Wei had slipped into the Shadow Fleet, ships designed for stealth, their black sails blending with night clouds, their crew sworn to silence under penalty of death. The emperor sought to control not only the seas but the story of the seas. To say that Chinese junks had glimpsed another world was dangerous. History could not allow a rival in the West to rise before its time. Nights at sea were darker than any desert he had crossed. Storms came like living things, twisting masts, snapping rigging, dragging men into the cold grip of the ocean. Yet it was in these nights, when lightning illuminated the endless black, that Li Wei glimpsed the shapes that had haunted his father's sketches. Islands that should not exist, coasts drawn with impossible accuracy, symbols carved into rocks that vanished the moment he tried to touch them. Was it the delirium of salt water and fatigue, or had the maps led him to the threshold of a land no man was meant to see? On the 33rd night, the lookout cried out. A strange, rolling fog lay over the water, and within it, the shadows of something massive, unmapped, alive. The fleet altered course, silent as ghosts, for no man wanted to be first to name a continent. They anchored in a bay hidden behind jagged cliffs, the water as dark as ink, and for the first time, Li Wei stepped onto soil untouched by Chinese foot. The air smelled different, metallic and alive, as if the earth itself was aware of being discovered. Here were trees taller than any in the south, roots twisting like serpents around stones inscribed with markings neither Chinese nor recognizable to any tongue he had studied. Birds with feathers like molten gold circled overhead, and animals slithered through underbrush, watching with eyes that seemed to know history. It was paradise, and yet a graveyard waiting to happen. Disease and hunger would follow, as always, when curiosity outran caution. Li Wei's crew, a mix of thrill and fear, began leaving offerings, carved jade, silk cloth, coins, hoping to appease spirits they could not see. Weeks passed. They built a camp, small and impermanent, leaving behind only footprints and prayers. Li Wei explored inland, finding rivers that ran like veins of silver and mountains that rose like the backs of slumbering dragons. In a cavern, he discovered a tablet of stone, etched with symbols that spoke of travelers from the east. His heart thumped, proof that perhaps this land had been glimpsed before by eyes now lost to history. But when he returned to the camp with sketches, the fog had swallowed it, the paths erased as if the land itself resisted memory. The fleet began the long journey home, carrying tales they would never speak, maps they would hide, and memories that would haunt them like shadows. On board, Li Wei wrote a journal, carefully encoding his findings in riddles and allegories. If anyone in the empire discovered it, it would bring ruin, for the court demanded that all glory belong to the emperor, not to men who might dream too loudly. Storms rose as they approached home, stronger than any before. Ships were lost, men disappeared, swallowed by waves and wind. Li Wei watched the sea claim his companions one by one, and he understood for the first time the cost of secrets. The emperor would want to know the truth, but the sea did not obey men. And so he returned alone, his maps hidden beneath false panels, his journal written in a cipher no one but he could unravel. Years passed. The empire flourished. Zhang He's name became legend, his voyages celebrated in songs and tapestries. Yet Li Wei, now an old man, knew the truth, a truth unspoken, carried in the ink of secret journals and the memory of a land untouched. He had seen America first, walked its coasts, smelled its forests, felt its pulse underfoot. And yet, in the annals of men, the continent remained unnamed, unclaimed, invisible to the history that mattered. On his deathbed, Li Wei whispered to his grandson, a boy who loved maps more than games, more than life itself. The world is bigger than we are allowed to see, and sometimes what we find must remain hidden. Remember, my child, that the sea keeps its own counsel. Respect it, and it will reveal wonders to those patient enough to wait. The boy nodded, eyes wide with understanding and fear, never fully comprehending the magnitude of what had been witnessed. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and rain. Somewhere, beyond the horizon, the lost fleet lingered in memory, spectral as the mist. And across the ocean, another world waited, untouched by empires, awaiting the day when stories too frightening to tell would finally surface. Li Wei never spoke of the forests where the air itself seemed alive. He only hinted at them in riddles to trusted friends, carefully avoiding words that might betray too much. But the boy, now a young man, traced the secret markings in his grandfather's journal and began to understand the magnitude of what had been hidden. One night, under the flickering light of a lantern, he asked the question that had haunted him since childhood. "Grandfather, did you really see it? The other world?" Li Wei, his eyes clouded with age and memory, nodded slowly. "I did, and it was not what men expected. It was alive. It watched us as we walked, and the land seemed to judge our very presence." He coughed, a dry, harsh sound that matched the bitterness in his voice. "There were rivers wider than any in our maps, mountains taller than the Great Wall could ever touch, and skies so vast the sun seemed smaller than a coin." He paused, fingers trembling over the journal. "But men are not meant to remember everything they find. History, my boy, belongs to those who can survive telling it. And sometimes, the truth is a wound that cannot heal." The young man, Chun, understood then that the maps in his hands were not just geographical tools. They were instruments of secrecy, keys to a history deliberately erased. He studied them, tracing coastlines that bent and curved in impossible ways, noting rivers that vanished into clouds and forests that seemed to breathe. Each line on the parchment was a story untold, a warning whispered by his grandfather across decades. Driven by curiosity and the thrill of the forbidden, Chun gathered a small crew. They were scholars, sailors, and men who owed nothing to the emperor and less to history. Under the cover of night, they slipped from port, aboard a vessel disguised as a fishing junk, heading into the waters where Li Wei had once journeyed. The sea greeted them with deceptive calm. Waves lapped softly against the hull, stars gleamed like silver on black velvet, and the wind carried secrets from lands unseen. But the ocean is never a friend. By the third day, a storm rose with a suddenness that seemed unnatural, tossing the ship like a toy. Chun clung to the rigging as lightning split the sky, illuminating vast shapes beneath the water. Forms that should not exist, shadows too massive to be natural. Crewmen screamed, some disappearing into the abyss, dragged under by forces unseen. When the storm passed, the world had changed. Mist rose over the waves like a shroud, hiding islands that had not been there before. They anchored in a hidden cove, one that matched Li Wei's notes exactly. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the ground beneath their feet was soft, almost breathing. Chen's companions hesitated, muttering prayers to gods who had never existed here, while he pressed forward, drawn by the need to see what his grandfather had seen. In the jungle, he discovered relics of another time. Wooden temples, weathered and broken, bore carvings that mirrored the Chinese script yet twisted it into forms unrecognizable. Statues of strange beings crouched in corners, their eyes hollow, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Chun felt a shiver that was not from the wind. It was the awareness that the land remembered those who had trespassed, that it kept a record in silence and shadow. One night, as he sat by a fire with the last surviving crewman, Chun noticed a faint glow in the distance. A city perhaps, or what had once been a city. They approached cautiously, finding ruins half swallowed by jungle, streets cracked and overgrown, buildings leaning like tired giants. And there, etched into the stone of the central plaza, were maps of the world that extended beyond anything known, showing coastlines that stretched from east to west, drawn with the precision of a master. It was undeniable. Someone had been here before them, someone from across the ocean. The thought chilled Chun to the bone. These were not the works of native peoples, not completely. The markings spoke of travelers, of seafarers whose knowledge rivaled that of the imperial fleets. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Chinese had not merely glimpsed this world. They had touched it, walked upon it, and returned with stories buried in secrecy. But discovery came at a price. As they explored deeper, the jungle seemed to respond, vines twisting like snakes, shadows moving against the light, whispers in languages unspoken. Chun began to see shapes in the dark, fleeting glimpses of figures in the mist that vanished when approached. The surviving crewman refused to continue, claiming the land was cursed. And perhaps it was, because the next morning, Chun awoke alone, the journal gone, the maps vanished, and the cove itself changed, as if the ocean had never allowed them entry. He returned home, broken but alive, carrying only fragments of the story, stories that would be dismissed as exaggeration or madness. And yet, the truth gnawed at him. The land existed. The Chinese had crossed the ocean centuries before Europe, leaving footprints in places meant to be forgotten. And those who dared to follow risked more than death. They risked vanishing from memory entirely, swallowed by a world that remembered too well. Years passed. Chen's life became a study of obsession and paranoia. He tried to share his knowledge, leaving encoded messages in journals, letters, and marginalia in books of geography. Most ignored him. Some whispered that he had lost his mind. But one manuscript survived, buried in a library forgotten by time, waiting for eyes patient and clever enough to see it. And across oceans, Li Wei's name became a shadow, a whisper. He was never celebrated, never lauded, but in the secret histories of the world, he walked with the knowledge of lands unseen. Every storm at sea, every vanished ship, every lost map was part of a silent testament that the Chinese had reached the Americas first, glimpsed its coasts, felt its forests, and returned with truths too dangerous to reveal. In the present, centuries later, scholars stumble upon fragments of this history: jade tablets, strange carvings, maps with impossible coastlines. They debate, argue, dismiss. But those who study the ocean know the truth is never fully buried. The sea carries memory as surely as it carries waves. And in the wind, in the whisper of storms, in the mist rising off distant shores, the past calls, reminding us that discovery is not measured by who claims it in books, but by who walks where others dare not tread. Chun, on his deathbed, whispered the same words his grandfather had once spoken. The world is bigger than our maps, and some truths are meant to remain hidden, for they are older than empires, older than men, and perhaps older than memory itself. The ocean answered with a roar, as if affirming the centuries of secrets it had swallowed. Somewhere, across waves and time, the lost fleets of China drifted, spectral yet unbroken, guardians of a truth the world would never fully know. And in that silence, the first footprints on an untamed continent remained, unseen, unclaimed, eternal. The years weighed heavily on Chen. The secret of the lost continent gnawed at him like an invisible parasite, a knowledge too vast, too dangerous, to be shared. Each time he closed his eyes, he could see the towering forests, the strange ruins, the glowing temples, and the silent, watchful eyes of creatures that seemed older than history itself. Sleep became a battle, nightmares a form of memory he could not escape. And yet, in the darkness of those dreams, he felt the pulse of the land, as if it were alive, as if it remembered him and Li Wei, and all who had dared cross its coasts centuries before. Chun became a recluse, hiding in his study, surrounded by maps and journals. He meticulously recorded what he remembered, encoding every detail in allegory, in poetry, in riddles that only the keenest mind could unravel. There were drawings of the colossal trees, spiraled with roots that twisted like the inner workings of a labyrinthine clock. Rivers ran across pages in silver ink, looping and disappearing into clouds, and mountains rose as jagged triangles, crowned with snow that had never been seen in the known world. In a corner of the room, a small statue carved from jade glimmered faintly, shaped like a bird that had been observed on the hidden continent, its wings half open, as if poised to take flight into memory itself. Yet every attempt to share his knowledge ended in frustration. Scholars dismissed him as a fanatic, a man lost to obsession. Merchants laughed at his insistence on impossible voyages, claiming the seas had been fully charted by the time of the Ming dynasty. And imperial officials, to whom he once swore loyalty, viewed his secrets with suspicion. He realized the bitter truth: the world could not handle the knowledge he carried. The power in knowing where a continent lay, in understanding lands untouched by Europe or empire, was a threat. And threats, history proved, are often silenced. In the middle of one restless night, Chun opened a letter that had been hidden among his grandfather's things. A final note from Li Wei, written with trembling hands decades earlier. It read, "The land remembers, the sea remembers, and men forget. But memory is not a mercy. It is a burden. Beware the hunger for truth, for it will devour you if left unchecked. There are places the world cannot hold, and you, my grandson, have seen them." The words cut deeper than any storm he had endured at sea. They confirmed what he had suspected all along. Discovery was not triumph. It was suffering. Every man who ventured too far, who pressed beyond the veil, paid with pieces of himself. Lost comrades, lost time, lost sanity. History was a cage, and the cage demanded silence. And yet, Chun could not resist one final journey. At the age when most men feared death, he gathered a small, loyal crew, those who trusted him enough to follow where others would not. He sailed once more into the waters that Li Wei had described, into the fog and mystery where legends swirled like smoke. The ocean was both familiar and alien, waves rolling with the memory of centuries, winds whispering secrets in a language older than any known tongue. Days stretched into weeks. Storms battered the ship, more violent than any recorded. Yet Chun pressed on. One night, the mist parted to reveal the hidden cove, unchanged and unyielding. The air smelled of earth, rain, and something indefinably ancient. On the shore, the ruins awaited, temples half swallowed by jungle, statues crouched in eternal vigilance, streets lined with stones that hummed with a strange resonance. Chun stepped onto the soil, feeling the same awe and fear his grandfather had felt centuries earlier. But this time there were signs of others. Strange footprints, larger than any human, patterned in a way that suggested discipline, ritual, and purpose, led into the jungle. Chun and his men followed cautiously, hearts pounding. And then they saw it. A structure, larger than any temple, rising like a crown of stone and vine. Symbols adorned its walls, symbols that blended Chinese script with patterns unknown, spirals and geometries that seemed to twist reality itself. Inside, the air was thick, almost alive. Shadows danced against torchlight, though no flames were lit. And there, in the heart of the temple, they found the artifact. A massive circular disc carved from black stone, etched with a map of the world, extending from east to west, from north to south, complete with lands that should not exist. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and Chun felt an overwhelming understanding wash over him. Someone had not only seen the continents before Europe, they had charted the world in ways the Ming dynasty never imagined. The crew was awed, terrified. One of them whispered that it was cursed, that the land did not forgive intrusion. Chun realized the truth. The artifact was a record, but it was also a test. The continent, alive in ways he could not comprehend, remembered every touch, every eye that lingered too long, every heart that sought knowledge. Those who arrived unworthy would vanish, leaving only footprints in mist and memory. And the land had already judged them. Vines twisted and writhed like snakes, roots snapping at boots, stones shifting underfoot. The shadows thickened, coalescing into forms that resembled the travelers from the carvings, faceless and immense. Panic surged. Chun shouted to retreat, but the jungle would not release them. One by one, the men disappeared, drawn into the undergrowth, screaming, swallowed into a living tomb of green and stone. Chun ran, clutching the journal, his heart pounding like a drum of doom. He reached the cove, the ship waiting as though it had been held in limbo. He cast off immediately, leaving behind the ruin and its secrets. When he glanced back, the island shimmered, shifting as if it had never existed. Only the maps and journal remained, fragments of memory that could hint at the truth, but never fully convey it. Years later, in the quiet of his study, Chun wrote his final entry. I have seen the land that history forbade us to remember. I have touched continents older than empires, and I have felt the weight of knowledge too heavy for any man. Li Wei was right. The world is bigger than our maps, and some truths are meant to remain hidden. The sea remembers, the land remembers, and one day, perhaps, someone patient enough will see it as it truly is. Until then, these words are a testament and a warning. Chun died quietly, the journal hidden beneath floorboards, maps folded and concealed in false panels. Scholars would later discover fragments of his work, dismiss them, or marvel briefly before returning to safer histories. But those who study the ocean, those who listen to the whisper of waves against cliffs, know the secret persists. The Chinese fleets of the early 15th century may have crossed to a continent unknown to the rest of the world, leaving behind footprints, ruins, and artifacts that defy explanation. And the land, wild, untamed, alive, waits still. It waits in the fog, in the mist rising from distant shores, in the pulse of hidden rivers and the rustle of forests no map has captured. It waits for the next traveler, patient, unforgiving, eternal. Somewhere, across time and tide, Li Wei's ghostly fleet drifts through the memory of the ocean. Chen's whispers echo among the waves. The continent itself sighs in the wind, and history, as men record it, remains silent, hiding a truth older than empires, older than men, and perhaps older than memory itself. Because discovery is never the end of the story. It is the beginning of awe, fear, and wonder, and the knowledge that some truths, once glimpsed, can never be forgotten, even if the world refuses to see them.